Thanks, David, and thank you to UNSW for inviting me. There's nothing more enjoyable or, I think, more good, to use Merlin's word, than actually talking to people about the possibilities of studying science. And in saying that, I have to say we've been lucky to hear from, and we're going to hear from more distinguished scientists tonight. In listening to Merlin, you're listening to one of Australia's most distinguished scientists indeed. And I've known about Merlin's great expertise in science for a very long time, and I've been following some of the magnificent things he does. But I hadn't realised till tonight what a great salesman he was. And I was listening there to those statistics, because I'm a data nut, and I do follow statistics enormously, and I have to tell you, he got it right. Those statistics are right, and UNSW has indeed been doing very, very well and doing spectacularly in its science and its engineering base. And it's a great university. I've seen it move. For some of you, some of people who are closer to my age maybe than the possible future students, will remember that this university, though very good for a very long time, didn't have the sort of facilities it's developed in recent times. This has become a place of great buzz, and so it's great to be associated with it. Now, I think Merlin's going to wonder why he asked me to come and speak, because I'm really here to tell you, in a way, that when you study and do any of those wonderful degrees that were nominated there with the science in the title, by and large, it doesn't lead to a job. There are some great exceptions. You study the psychology degrees, you can train and get formal accreditation as a psychologist. Similarly, in optometry, you can become a professional in that area, and there are a couple of professions come off there. But by and large, you don't study science to be a scientist, particularly in Australia, where we don't have a lot of white coat jobs. There are some magnificent jobs in the Bureau of Meteorology, some jobs in the manufacturing sector. David's a geologist, and there's a great need for geologists, although we've seen booms and busts in that area, although the minerals industry and the energy industries are definitely here to stay in a big way. Why do you study science then? Well, I'll come through a few reasons. But for me, I am what I think a lot of you are going to be, in the sense that when you study, they say that for those of you who are just about to enter university over the next few years, you're likely to have 4 or 5 careers. Not a single career as people often did. You will actually move between different jobs. So what you really need are what's called generic skills. Skills that move and allow you to keep learning, to keep in lifelong learning and adapting to all sorts of challenges and to be able to grab great opportunities. That wasn't the way when I graduated in the mid-70s. There, people were expected to go into a job and more or less move up the chain, but by a series of accidents, and that often happens with women, by a series of personal things, bringing up the kids and whatnot, you end up jumping between things. I finished my PhD. I was very lucky. I did part of it at the ANU. I'm not a graduate of here, even if so none of this is biased advertising. But I then went from the University of Queensland, where I did my first degree, to do in science, where I studied honours physics and maths. Went to ANU, started doing an engineering physics degree, but in automatic speech recognition, in days before computer science really existed as a discipline. It just was getting going. But luckily moved, even though that was great, I moved on to the University of Turin in Italy, came back, handed in my thesis at the ANU, went on into academic life and consulting life as a computer scientist, had a great research career, and then at the same time was teaching a lot, became the first female dean of engineering, information science and engineering at the University of Canberra. Was very lucky, was on all sorts of boards and committees, on the Australia Prize Committee, now called the Prime Minister's Prize for Science, on the Australian Research Council, on the Cooperative Research Centres Committee, on the board of CSIRO. I've been really, really lucky. And went to be Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research at the University of Adelaide, and then was Vice-Chancellor for 5 years. After that, went out and formed a consultancy which in particular does big reviews, particularly of big government organisations like the Bureau of Meteorology, like big science programs, a lot of work here at the University of New South Wales. And in 2008 I was appointed the first Chief Scientist and Engineer for New South Wales, and I do that on a 3-day-a-week basis, and I do a lot of boards and committees in the other part of my life. Some of those, for example, I sit on the board of the New Zealand Antarctic Research Institute, and that's a very exciting thing where that institute is looking at the big questions with regard to climate change and the Antarctic and the Southern Ocean. Because for New Zealand, if global warming gets going at a certain level, their whole economy changes because it's a very agrarian-based economy. They really study climate change issues very, very intently. And in particular, they are worried about what happens if the Ross Ice Shelf cracks and breaks. And so they study it intensively and have mechanisms through the Antarctic Research Institute to bring research, philanthropic and industry funding from around the world to work in those areas. And they work with Australia, but they work with other polar scientists. I chaired the Australian Centre for Renewable Energy for the whole of its life, from 2010 to 2012, the main government body of that period giving out grants on renewable energy technologies. That was very, very exciting. In my Chief Scientist and Engineer role at the moment, I'm very busy on coal seam gas, advising doing a review, an independent review for the government on all aspects of coal seam gas for our state, and I hope any of you who wish to will make submissions to that review. The submission time is technically closed, but we're still taking submissions. That's a tremendously complex and difficult matter, trying to work through the science questions, which some of you might have seen me on television the last few days saying it's water, water, water is the big issue. But there are many issues, and some of them are about science, some of them about community consultation, where science interacts with the community. It's an industry, the oil and gas industry has been moving technologically and has vastly improved its technologies in recent times, and one's got to make a series of judgments through that. Last year I advised the government on sea level rise, and there's a whole series of new reviews in the pipeline. It's fun. But why I've been able to do all that is that I had a wonderful time doing science at the University of Queensland in my case. And what really stuck with me particularly as I studied mainly science, physics and maths with a small amount of chemistry, and I did study, I have to tell you, computer science for all of 6 weeks till I decided it was so boring. It was on Friday afternoons. All the lectures were concentrated on Friday afternoons, so it was my 5th subject and I dropped it to go to the beach. It didn't stop me later becoming a professor of computer science and having one of the biggest computer science research labs in the country. So the great thing about science is it does stick with you. And what particularly stuck with me, of all things, was my pure maths that I studied. Understanding symbolic reasoning really has driven through all my artificial intelligence work, my work in automatic speech recognition, my understanding of science, being able to understand it and capture it through symbolic reasoning has been pivotal to all aspects of my career. And I think back to, and I really thought of myself early on as a physicist and then as an engineer and as a computer scientist. But I'm many things, but it particularly turns on the skills I learned there. And that's something I want to say to you here is that if you're in year 10 or year 9 and you're thinking about things, do try and keep maths at the highest level possible at school. It does help with the choices when you come to look at that wonderful array of degree choices that Merlin showed you. It does open up the widest array of choices you can possibly think of. But if for some reason maths has dropped, there are ways of coming back and capturing it. And my story is not atypical. There are many people who have had unusual careers. And one of the things with those great generic skills, those great ways of dealing with knowledge, those great ways of viewing the world, great ways of asking hard questions, being able to pose problems, that's one of the things you really learn through a science degree at a great university. That skill allows you to be very valuable and very employable to all sorts of people. One person I like to think of, not a graduate of this university, but a very distinguished Australian, is Nicholas Leader. Nicholas has just left Australia to be the head of Google France, And he was he was the managing director of Google Australia till he left. Nick has a science degree from an honours science degree from the University of Sydney, and I can remember his parents are friends of mine, and I knew Nick growing up. And he'd asked Nick, "What are you going to do with your science degree?" And he didn't really know. He was picked up by McKinsey's very early, then had a series of very senior jobs in the publishing industry of all things, and then went to run Google. And he's a great example of the way his analytic skills, his communication skills, his deep love of difficult questions makes him the absolutely perfect chief executive of various aspects of Google. But there are, again, many, many stories. And Nick, what's Nick? Nick's sort of probably just nudging 40. And you're going to hear that sort of stories. A science degree equips you well for life and for challenging things and for things that are very exciting to do. But as Merlin's already touched on, you don't have to sort of give up the possibility of immediate career choices when you do science. One of the things that's really happened tremendously over the last 20 to 25 years has been the rise of the dual degree, the double degree. And while it goes back on much longer than that, it's really become very popular, and it's students who voted with their feet and have really grabbed them. And I just am in awe of the people who actually have really pushed the whole science, the double degree issue forward. And it has been very, as they might say, customer-led, student-led. And it does allow you to join maybe an immediate career choice, engineering, medicine, law, with science. It's really, and it makes you that much more employable, that much more interesting to employers when you come out with those double degrees. And they are very satisfying. Students who do them are very, very happy with them. They're well worth thinking about. There's lots of, the one thing about UNSW, it has a massive choice in the dual degrees. It'll take you ages to read through the university handbook on the matter, but I urge you to do it. And I urge you to ask tonight and things like this about them. They really do give wonderful possibilities. And they teach you both specific skills of a particular profession plus the great generic skills that come from studying science. The other thing you can do, and again exciting, but something that really changes the world and changes the lives of others and Australians, it's about doing good, and hopefully you do it well while you do good, and that is be a science teacher. We should all for a second think very gratefully about the people who've taught us science at school. Often they're the people who change our lives and give us a view of what we might do long term. And certainly I was very influenced by people who taught me science and inspired me. And Australia, which has a productivity growth problem at the moment that you can read ad nauseum in our newspapers, read about it, it really turns that we really have to improve the way Australians think and do, and the way they apply smarts to problems. We've got to work smarter as a country. And to do that, we have to have an extraordinarily well-educated population. And for that, we need a population that knows about contemporary knowledge. And contemporary knowledge has been about the movement of science and the movement of scientific activities. You only have to think about the iPhones and the iPads we use. You only have to think about the very sophisticated way we are travelling. We'll soon be in driverless cars. Think about our energy supply and the forms of energy. And you need to have some understanding of how to think about that. And to that end, you need to be able to think about things scientifically. You need a solid scientific education, at least at the school level. And we need brilliant science teachers. And we're starting to see governments understand that we really must pay science teachers very, very well. And I noted that the ATAR for it is going up here. So it's actually going to be a hard thing to get into in due course, but it can change lives. So I do urge you to think about it. It's one of the greatest things you can do is to be a science teacher. And in closing, I'd just like to say something very, very simple. Science, I've found through a long and complex life, is fun. I find it inspiring, but above all, I just love it. Scientific questions, understanding the problems, rising to the challenges. To me, it's great fun, and it does allow me, I think, at least for the state of New South Wales, to do some good. Thank you.